Welcome to ExperiMental, the science show where girls strut, gherkins smoke, and men fondle underwear. Later on, we'll be walking on eggs, getting exceedingly drunk, and attempting to save a life. But first, the physics of stilettos. Meet Dr. Paul Stevenson, a theoretical physicist at the University of Surrey.
My last paper was on absorbing boundary conditions in dynamical calculations of nuclear collisions and giant resonances.
Pretty impressive stuff, but Dr. Stevenson is also a man who, like many men, has an interest in women. The prettier the better. So when the Institute of Physics wanted a fun equation to amuse the public with the wonders of their subject, it took Dr. Stevenson just a few seconds to come up with this. Believe it or not, these figures are, for women, a scientific guide to the perfect length of their stiletto heels. The most important bit of the equation is the Q number.
Clearly, she's miscalculated her Q number.
So what is a Q number? Well, being physics, a Q number is in fact the product of another, much longer equation. It's based on an index of sociological factors like Y, the number of years you've been wearing stilettos.
I was born in stilettos.
That'll be almost 35 then. L, the cost of the shoes.
£129?
Is that cheap or expensive? T, the time since the style was in fashion.
These are in fashion right now.
I'll take her word for it. And P, the probability the shoe will help you pull.
100%.
Agreed. And finally, there's A, the number of units of alcohol to be consumed whilst wearing them.
This only counts as one.
So that's a total of 9, making a Q factor of 0.08. But what is a Q factor exactly? The maximum length of heels is determined first by physics, predominantly how high you can raise your heel. You can work this out by standing on tiptoes. Then there are the sociological factors, and those are what Dr. Stevenson calls the Q factor. They help determine how close to the physical maximum length you can actually handle. They're things like, how long have you been wearing them? Not long, and you should go for a shorter heel. Then there's the cost. Cost a lot, and you'll probably try harder to wear them, even if they're a bit longer than you can handle. When we asked Dr. Stevenson to do the maths for our model, he calculated that the units of alcohol consumed had reduced the safe heel by a factor of 12, from a maximum of around 15 centimetres to a rather stubby 1.25 centimetres. Which means that the chances of our model getting to the door without an accident are pretty slim. And once again, physics triumphs.
Hello.
In a moment, scientific advice on how to get a good deal with a bra. But first, let the test department lighten your day. The light bulb. Clever, but by no means infallible. But fear not when it pops, because the test department has a replacement you can eat. A pickled gherkin. To turn a gherkin into a light bulb is a highly complex and dangerous procedure, which requires years of expertise.
Yes, and if you haven't got years of expertise, don't do it. Because it's electricity we're talking about here, and it can and will kill.
Luckily, we do have years of experience and know how to beef up the terminals of our lamp with some nails. how to mount the green thing to best effect. So now it's time to hit the switch. Taking the precaution of donning a gas mask. And it works. But why? A gherkin bulb works a bit like an orange street lamp, the electricity heating up sodium crystals in the pickling fluid, which is why it gives off that characteristic orange light. Luckily, the gherkin bulb is unlikely to be lighting much more than the test department labs in the near future, as it suffers from one rather large drawback. Coming up on ExperiMental, this chap will swig 200 millilitres of vodka in the name of science. And the test department will walk on eggs. But first, ever thought men were stupid? Strut around the Belgian town of Leuven as a tourist and you'll probably be struck by its beauty. But if you're a Leuven bloke, you'll probably be distracted by another form of beauty. That's right. Leuven blokes are like blokes right around the world. They see a good-looking woman, and that's all they can think about for the next half an hour. And that's why we're here. You see, at Leuven's Katholieke University Department of Economics, there are two blokes who are more obsessed with women than most. Indeed, they're responsible for those bits of underwear you see draped near the door to their department. Meet Bram van den Berg and Dr. Siegfried de Witt. They're interested in how sexy women affect men's cognitive processes. That's science speak for thinking.
It's known from previous research that the use of sexy women has some influence on the cognitive processes of men.
Well, that's not exactly earth-shattering. It's something that the advertising industry has known for years. If you can't sell a car on its looks, put a looker on it, and it'll drive itself off the forecourt. But how to prove this scientifically? Mr. van den Berg and Dr. de Witt hit upon the idea of using that other male obsession, money. They put out a call for heterosexual men to come to their labs, fondle women's underwear, and make some cash. Amazingly, it took a whole cup of tea for a queue to form outside their door. What these strapping lads had signed up to was the opportunity to split €10 between them.
There are two roles in this game. One role is a proposer, and the proposer has to decide on the split of an amount of money. And there is also the responder, and the responder has two options. He can either accept the proposal, or the responder can also reject the offer. And in that case, none of the parties gets anything.
What the two players have to do is to agree to split the money between them. It could be €1 for one and €9 for the other. But if they can't agree on a split, then they'll both lose the money. Logically, the fair split would be €5 each. But if one person is a more aggressive bargainer, he can usually walk away with more than his fair share. The git. So where do the bras come in? Well, amazingly, give a man a bra to fondle before he tries to strike a bargain, and all of a sudden, he'll accept any old deal.
When you have been exposed to a sex queue, you become more likely to accept an unfair offer. So, whereas a fair offer would, for example, be a 50-50 split, a man who was exposed to a bra, for example, he would be more likely to accept an unfair split, like €2 for myself and €8 for the other one.
What's even more interesting is that aggressive men with higher testosterone levels are much more affected by sex queues than their more meek brothers. But it seems it's not just the fact that it's a woman that's turning these butch men into pliable wimps. When the respondents were shown pictures of older women, or women in non-provocative dresses, their bargaining powers were simply not affected.
At the contrary, the high testosterone men were very hard bargainers, so they don't lose their minds and they are not affected. In fact, they want to show how tough they are, apparently. It's only when the woman is dressed in a very sexy way, like you see all the time, like Bram just said on the streets, then this change, this shift occurs.
So it seems that for all our bullish, brutish posturing, when it comes to bargaining, we men can be shot down by the simplest of cues.
It's a quite pessimistic view on man, what we have been able to show. It's like you show them 15 pictures of sexy women. It's not nude women at all. So it's not that they're around, it's not during the bargaining game, it's only after exposures. The preference of these men have changed too. So they become more likely to accept unfair offers. And it's quite bizarre that men are influenced by such a subtle environmental cue.
I don't know. Is it really that bizarre to stop thinking about money and just go ahead and buy this woman a drink? To pay for her dinner, a taxi home, that new dress, the overdue gas bill? In a moment, we prove hopscotch and alcohol don't mix. But first, to the test department, to attempt the impossible. There's a bit of a discussion going on in the test department. One of our testers is determined to prove that a human can stand on eggs without breaking them. His colleagues are not convinced, especially when preliminary trials end in spectacular failure. Undaunted, he's persuaded the lightest and most delicate of his fellow testers to participate in a real-life experiment. He insists that, in theory, the 2 planks will spread the load. But unfortunately, the only thing being spread here is egg. All over the table. In theory, an egg works in exactly the same way as a dome, with all the force being sent downwards through the line of the roof. This makes it one of the strongest shapes in nature, but can it hold a human? What is needed is more load dispersal and a little less movement. Armed with a new refined quadruple width Eggplank 3000, in other words, an old piece of board he found round the back, our indomitable tester has dared the dainty-footed one once more to risk life and limb in the pursuit of scientific knowledge. Proof at last that it is possible to stand on eggs. Well, almost. After all, you can't make an omelette without breaking an egg. Why should science be any different? Still to come on ExperiMental, can we use the appliance of science to save this man from a near certain death? Well, not before we've had a stiff drink, we can't. It's Saturday night in Bristol. That can mean only one thing. Yep, it's time to continue Britain's love affair with alcohol.
Well, I like drinking alcohol because it's a good way to relax at the end of the day. It gets rid of your stresses. It's a place to meet with your mates. You always meet at the pub.
As people become more chatty when they've had a couple of beers.
Yeah, get rid of your inhibitions. Always just be yourself a bit more, I think.
Yes, a good drink does all these things, but it also makes you aggressive, makes you sick, not to mention what this bunch will feel like tomorrow morning. And that's why ExperiMental has turned up. We're off to the University of Bristol to meet Professor Nutt, a psychopharmacologist at Bristol University who wants to replace alcohol with less harmful drugs.
I reckon probably about one person a day in the UK, probably 300 to 400 a year, die of alcohol poisoning. And then it's many thousands die of or get brain damage as a consequence of having road traffic accidents when they're drunk. A large number of people get raped, probably the order of 3 or 4 a day as a consequence of being drunk. And then the damage through fights and violence and knifings, it's probably the order of 5 to 10 a day. So there's a huge social cost of being drunk. So alcohol is a drug which could not be licensed today. If it was invented today, it would be banned without any doubt.
There's some evidence that alcohol actually originated in Neolithic times, when sore heads were a fact of life. Given the fact that the modern freezer was a few thousand years away, booze was a pretty good way of preserving some of the goodness in fruit and berries way beyond their season. And let's face it, with life expectancies of less than 30 years, cirrhosis of the liver was not something ancient man was worried about. Nowadays, things are different. We can see the damage it does every day, which is why Professor Nutt wants to find an alternative.
And I thought, well, we could potentially find drugs which could mimic the effects of alcohol, which would inevitably be safer than alcohol because they're drugs and not a toxin like alcohol. They wouldn't cause the same damage to the peripheral organs.
That's right. If David Nutt gets his way, then it's goodbye to the pint and the cocktail, and hello to the little pill. To simulate the effects of alcohol, any drug would have to work by boosting the effects of the brain's neurotransmitters. Initially, alcohol affects the higher thinking centres of the brain, which is why we lose our social inhibitions and begin to think we're brilliant. Sadly, alcohol soon starts inhibiting our ability to think clearly, before going on to inhibit the workings of other areas of the brain, affecting our balance and muscle coordination.
Talking about benzodiazepine-like drugs, because we know that those have many of the effects of alcohol, and because it's a receptor, and we have drugs which bind to the receptor and increase the effects of the natural transmitter GABA in the brain, and they do mimic many of the effects of alcohol, we could probably get to a situation where you could have an intoxicant that was safe and also reversible.
So what we're talking about here is the opportunity to get drunk safely, then sober up in a matter of moments. This sounds too good to be true, so we recruited 2 drinkers to find out. Dem here is going to hit the vodka, a less than healthy 200 ml of the stuff, mixed with orange juice. While Simon gets a cocktail of a rather different sort, provided by Professor Nutt.
Cheers.
If Professor Nutt's got his mix right, the effects of his chewy little pills will be much the same as the real tasty stuff in the glass. To find out, ExperiMental has set up a number of simple dexterity tasks. Easy sober, but kinda hard to do once the booze has kicked in. So, let's see if the alcohol has entered the bloodstream. 1.65, that's twice the UK legal limit for driving, which is why we'll play hopscotch. So, we can say that 200 ml of vodka is detrimental to the game. But what about 2 little pills? Not too bad. Oh, spoke too soon. Now how about darts? That's the drinking man's game. Whoa, and double naught scored there. And finally, the policeman's old favourite, walking down the white line. First, Dem the boozer. And now, Simon the pill popper. Steady as a drunk. But how does he feel?
At the moment I'm feeling some of the more physical effects as if I was drunk. I'm feeling a bit lightheaded and legs not quite as under control as usual, but not really getting so much of the psychological effects, like getting chatty or feeling more relaxed.
And that's the problem for Professor Nutt's chewy little alcohol substitute. Most people drink for the chatty bit, not for the falling over bit.
Now, it's not identical, and there are some aspects of alcohol, particularly the initial energizing effects. When people begin to get drunk, they often become a bit activated, and that isn't mimicked by that benzodiazepine. Until we can mimic alcohol completely, we won't know whether this is a viable alternative. I do accept that.
But there is one massive advantage to Professor Nutt's pills. They have an antidote. Dem's blood alcohol level will not return to normal for about 8 hours. But Simon here will be as sober as a judge within seconds. To prove it, let's see what happens when he plays darts once more.
Aim for 3 treble 20s for me, please.
180! Almost. Finally, it's ExperiMental to the rescue. Roofing tiles, fishing line, and the lid of a styrofoam beer cooler. What do these 3 things have in common? Well, they might just save a life, because stick them all together and you've got the water kite. It's the rather unlikely invention of Trevor Miller, keen angler and water sports enthusiast, who wasn't having much luck one day trying to catch a fish because his bobber wouldn't stay put.
The moment of inspiration for the water kite came when I was fishing in a river, casting my line out and watching the fishing bobber float downstream. I came up with an idea to keep the fishing bobber out in the current by fixing sort of like an upside-down sail to the bottom of the fishing bobber.
Once he had his bobber working, Trevor started to think bigger.
I basically went into my father's barn and took a look at what I had around, a styrofoam cooler lid, a roofing shingle, and some fishing twine, realizing that I've come up with an idea that might someday save people's lives.
The usual way to rescue a victim from a raging river is to try and throw him a rope. But to do that, you have to time your throw just right to land the rope in front of the victim as he floats past. The water kite overcomes this difficulty by taking timing out of the equation. Once the water kite is in position, it can be held there until the victim reaches it.
The water kite is able to float upstream by working off the principle of lift in much the same way that a kite flies against the wind.
Kites fly by exploiting Newton's third law.
For every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. At least, that's roughly it.
Hold a kite flat and there's no lift. But tilt it and the air hits the underside of the kite.
Aye, that's the action bit.
And it goes up.
Oh, that's the reaction bit.
This angle of attack, as it's called, is the key element in the way aeroplanes fly. Their wings, angled to the oncoming air, generate a lift. Up to a point, increasing the angle of attack increases the lift.
Aye, but only up to a point.
What Trevor's water kite does is use the same principles. Now it's the water pushing on the angled fin that makes the water kite rise upstream, just like a real kite would rise into the air. By pulling the 2 ropes attached to the kite, you can change its angle of attack. And you can make the water kite float as if flying upstream, maintaining its position until the hapless victim floats by. It's only a prototype, but in the future, Trevor hopes that his water kite will be standard issue in search and rescue teams, and even the military. ExperiMental was so impressed by what Trevor thought to do with his water cooler, string and roofing shingle that we asked some other inventors what they'd come up with, but the results were not quite so promising.
If you know what you're doing, you could kill someone with these things.
Materials to build a house?
A mice yacht device.
My treehouse when I was a little kid.
The hideous jewelry my ex-boyfriend used to buy for me. And that's why he's my ex-boyfriend.